efforts, JNU Insights, JNU Insights presents a specialized subset focused on global affairs. Today, we are discussing on geopolitical shifts and Middle East diplomacy, challenges and opportunities, for which we have with us Dr. Josef Olmert, expert on modern Middle East and Israeli politics. In his long career, Dr. Olmert was director of the Government Press Office Israel and advisor to former Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir during the First Gulf War and policy advisor to Defense Minister Moshe Aarons. He also served as many diplomatic missions across the world and was participant at the Madrid Peace Conference in 1991 and subsequent Israeli-Syrian peace talks. As to Israeli politics, Dr. Olmert played a significant role, particularly as a director and founding member of the Council for Parliamentary Democracy that spearheaded the successful campaign to repeal direct elections for Prime Minister. Dr. Olmert also was very active in public campaigns to promote and enhance understanding between Arab and Jewish citizens of the State of Israel. He secured press relations for Israel, the Soviet Union, and China, and represented the Prime Minister in numerous conferences and appearances in the United States, Great Britain, Australia, China, Russia, Japan, Ireland, and South Africa, among others. In addition, he has participated in numerous international conferences on the Middle East and has maintained good working relations with Arab and Palestinian diplomats. His media experience has included him penning a political column for Israel's largest newspaper, Yodit Ordonot, as well as Jerusalem Post, and numerous appearances on radio and TV shows all over the world. Dr. Olmert was also a regular columnist for the Huffington Post and still writes regularly to the Times of Israel, Your Middle East, Fair Observer, Newsmax, as well as many other publications. Dr. Olmert also currently an adjunct professor at University of South Carolina. He also holds PhD from prestigious London School of Economics in Middle East History and headed Syria and Lebanon desk and served on the faculty at Tel Aviv University's Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies. He has also taught at Hebrew University, Cornell University, York University in Canada, City College in New York, and American University in DC. He authored 3 books on the Middle East as well as numerous articles in important academic journals. As a speaker, Dr. Olmert has a very extensive experience in lecturing in colleges and universities in US, Canada, Europe, and to major Jewish and civil organizations, as well as important business meetings where Dr. Olmert's assessment about global affairs are very valued. As our moderator of this session, we have with us Ms. Toshiba Shukla, educator at an academy, author and mentor at JNU Insights. She also has expertise in treaties and convention on the environment. So, yes, sir. So, Dr. Olmert, we are delighted to have you here. How are you doing?
My pleasure to be with you. And by the way, I need you to know that I did visit India. And I'll tell you why I mentioned that. It was in 1998. And you know in what period? Exactly at the week when both India and Pakistan tested their nuclear capabilities. I had nothing to do with it. I was a guest of the UN Sports Conference in New Delhi, and it was a very tense atmosphere altogether. But I remember this visit very fondly.
Yeah. So, sir, I would start with the interview. So for everybody to get accustomed with the today's topic, my first question to you is, Professor, how would you define the Middle East significance global geopolitics today, and what key factors make the region so strategically important?
Well, I would say that we have an image of the Middle East as being a constant powder keg, a very unstable area, very dangerous to world security, which is very true. I don't know if the Middle East is the most dangerous part of the world. One can argue that maybe the Korean Peninsula is, or maybe the overall situation with China and its neighbors is, but definitely the Middle East is a very significant contributor to world instability. Now, the real point that I would like to start with and make here is that people outside of the Middle East, particularly in Western democracies, but also in countries that may not be considered Western, but still democratic, even like India, if you will, when people watch the situation in the Middle East, they tend to look at the immediate problem and say, look, Iran is a big problem. It is. Syria current situation, a big problem. Of course it is. The Israeli-Palestinian war in Gaza is a big problem. Of course it is. So we look at the immediate crisis and we tend to overlook or to ignore what may be the more profound, deeper causes of problems which affect the situation, which lead to the conflicts, because it is sometimes easier to go to diplomatic solutions rather than to get to the root of the problem, to the causes of problems. And because of that problem, that we tend to be a little bit more superficial in the way we look at the Middle East. We look at the immediate situation and we say, okay, let's do this, let's do that. We tend to forget that while we resolve an immediate situation here, there are some other problems that are arising because of domestic issues, cultural problems, religious conflicts that we don't like to pay attention to. And that's where the problem with the Middle East is. We have profound historic issues that continue for centuries and generations. And you know what? In the Indian Peninsula, people can understand it because also the similarities, some to an extent, with the historic experiences that you have over there. Take Syria now, just to give you an example, just one example. So the real cause of the Syrian civil war is the sectarian strife that really prevented Syria from ever becoming a real stable, unified political community between the Sunni Muslims, the majority, and the Alawi minority. You know, the attitude of Sunni Muslims toward the Alawis in Syria is influenced greatly by a fatwa, a religious ruling of a Muslim scholar, Ibn Taymiyyah, from 700 years ago. And everybody in Syria knows about that, where he said 700 years ago that the Alawis are even worse than the infidels, and therefore they're almost like, if you will, almost like subhumans, God forbid, and therefore they deserve to be killed, and so on and so forth. When you look at the situation in Syria and you see the sectarian situation, you can argue it's this policy of one Assad or the second Assad or that policy. It started a long time ago. It has much more profound problems. And therefore, to sum up, before I give you, the floor back to your questions, when we talk about the Middle East now, and we see the challenges to world diplomacy and to world stability, bear in mind that what we are doing all the time is we are putting off a fire here, we're putting on a fire there, but we don't really get into the bottom, the root causes, the basis, the fundamentals of so many of those conflicts. Therefore, they are bound to repeat themselves.
Yes, sir. So looking at this, sir, reduced engagement of United States in the Middle East, it has led to significant developments. Like, do you believe like regional actors like Saudi Arabia, Iran, Israel can finally take the lead in resolving these conflicts that are root causes of the Middle East problem, or is the international intervention still necessary?
Let's start with Iran. And that's exactly coming back to the point I made, Yes, look, Iran's problem with Israel, let's look at it. There is no border between Iran and Israel. There is no direct conflict between Iran and Israel. There has never been a conflict between Iran and Israel. The conflict is because Iran is calling itself today the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is to say that we put our Islamic identity on top of our Iranian identity, and we therefore pursue a Muslim, that case Shia Muslim, foreign policy with regard to Israel, but with regard also to the US, with regard to the rest of the Middle East. So I'm not in a position here, nor am I going to do that now, to tell you that there has to be a regime change in any country. I mean, it's not my business to say to the Iranian people what to do about their regime. That's their business. But I can tell you that so long as this regime espouses and promotes a policy of pan-Shiism, it's a problem. And it's a problem for the Sunni countries in the first place. Saudi Arabia is a Shia minority that not too many people know about 10%. Yemen is 35% Shia, Iraq is 55%, Lebanon 35%, and so on and so forth. So the Sunni Shia problem here is something that we in the West, Israel, and even India, we can't do anything about because it goes back 1400 years. So the role of Iran, therefore, is a very destructive role, so long as they decide to pursue the policy that they have pursued for so many years. President Jimmy Carter just died. And why do I mention it? he was the president of the US when the revolution started in Iran. And historically speaking, he hosted the Shah of Iran a year before it all started and talking glowing terms about him. And then when the revolution started, he basically abandoned him. And he believed that he does it because this is the will of the Iranian people. All this sounds very nice, right? We go with the will of the Iranian people. So see what happened. This regime in Iran, since 1979, has been more totalitarian, more dictatorial, more aggressive than anything that was under the Shah. So to be honest with you, what can we do about Iran? It depends on the Iranians first. They need to decide if they want to continue what they've already done until now, which is to destabilize the Middle East in the name of their ideology, or that the price that they've already paid for this policy is too high. You talk about Saudi Arabia. That might be the better news here. Why are changes in Saudi Arabia? Because Saudi Arabia, like other Arab countries, the Sunni Muslim countries, not all of them, but some of them, you know about the Abraham Accords between Israel and UAE and Bahrain and Morocco and all that, the Saudis have reevaluated their priorities and decided the Shi'i challenge from Iran is more dangerous than what was supposed to be the Israeli challenge. Why is the challenge from Iran to Saudi Arabia? Religion, history. What can we do about it? It's not our conflict. When we try to interfere from the outside and tell other people how they have to behave, usually we are failing because nobody likes to hear from others that they are inferior to them, that others are better, they know better what to do. The Saudis have to make their historic decision. They are on the verge of making a decision. Should we join the peace process with Israel? Calling it in one way or another, or are we still afraid of Iran and we try to accommodate ourselves with Iran and try to come up with some kind of balance between the two? Here is the role of the US, because you mentioned all this in your question, so I'm referring to each one of your names you mentioned. This is now the real challenge of American policy under Donald Trump when he comes to power in a matter of 3 weeks or something, 20-something days. He has to decide on his priorities. And that's, again, his decision. There are signs that he is adopting very isolationist approaches to issues. There are conflicting signs that it is not exactly the case about every foreign policy issue. If the US will play a constructive role in terms of the Middle East, the role should be to encourage countries to enlarge, to expand the process that started in his first term, the Abraham Accords and all that, that will isolate Iran and push them to make their big decision. It will require concessions from the Arabs. It will require concessions from Israel. There's no question about it. Everybody will have to make concessions. But the problem really is for us to make those decisions. We cannot work under the pressure from the outside because pressures like this hold water for a short while and then they dissipate.
Yes, sir. So in line with the previous question, we are also seeing China's growing influence and its efforts to fill the power vacuum in the Middle East. China's mediation of the Saudi-Iran deal, seen as the equivalent to US-led Abraham Accords to strengthen peace in the Middle East. So how do Middle Eastern countries perceive China's growing influence? Do they view it as a opportunity for diversification or as a new challenge?
Well, it's interesting. Again, it all is, you're correct. Your questions are very good because they're leading from one to the other in terms of the answers. It's so logical and consistent because, again, why did the Saudis, who depend for their national defense on the US, why did they go to China to have some kind of so-called accommodation with Iran? Really, I mean, it's don't take it too seriously, so-called. Because the Biden administration was perceived to be too weak, inconsistent. The Saudis considered Iran to be their number one enemy. When they saw the Obama administration running after the Iranians, for them it wasn't just Iran, it was the Shiis as opposed to Sunnis. You have to understand it. And Trump tried to change the equation. The Saudis were almost on the verge of joining the Abraham Accords. few more months for Trump administration at that time, they would have joined, but they didn't. Comes Biden, somebody who said that the heir apparent successor to the throne in Saudi Arabia is a pariah, and attacked him personally. And then, of course, oil prices went up in America. So what are you doing? You go to the Saudis and you ask them to increase production in order to reduce oil prices. He comes to visit Saudi Arabia, and the Saudis humiliated him. It was unbelievable. There was not even one American flag in the entire city while the president of the US visited. The crown prince met him without shaking hands, just, with the fist. So what I'm trying to tell you, the Saudis realized America is unstable. It's not clear what is their policy. So they looked for another option. For them, China was like another option. And a reminder to the US, we don't put all our eggs in your basket. If they have to choose between the US and China, they will go for the US. And other countries in the Middle East, if they have to choose between the US and China, they will go for the US. But they have to be presented with this clear-cut American policy. The Chinese, by the way, you'll be surprised to hear that, have in recent years expanded their interest in Israel. A lot of Chinese investment in interesting stuff in Israel. Among other things, they bought the largest food producer company in Israel, food. And they invested in infrastructure and in technological exchanges. Yet at every opportunity, they attack Israel verbally, they condemn Israel, whatever, but then they have these cooperations. The Chinese create the impression, which is to their advantage, and I have to make the point here, that they basically say to countries, don't take seriously what we say, take seriously what we do. And they therefore kind of separate themselves from the immediate suspicion, the kind of the structural fear that people have about cooperation with such a big superpower. And they have this feeling in Iran. As much as the Iranians and the Chinese seem to be in one bed, so to speak, it's not so the case, by the way. The same, by the way, for Iran and Russia. The Iranians are very afraid that instead of the big Satan being America, if they are too dependent on China, China will become the big Satan in the future. So the Chinese influence can still be contained. It can still be contained. And that brings it to what you said before or asked before, the role of the US again. I leave it at that because Trump is unpredictable.
Yeah.
He's spontaneous, he's whimsical, okay? I'm trying to be moderate and soft, but that's what he is. We'll see what happens. It's not enough to talk about China. We'll see what they do. China can still be contained.
Yeah.
And hopefully it will be.
Sir, also we are witnessing normalization of relation with Middle East states like the Saudi-Iran deal, the Abraham Accords, the Qatar blockade resolution. What opportunities do the shifting geopolitical tides present for the Middle Eastern countries in terms of economic development and also tackling their shared challenges in the region?
Economy is
Yeah.
so significant. And I was waiting for the word to be said, because when I told you before in the beginning that we look at immediate situations and look for diplomatic solutions, we tend to ignore or to evade discussion about profound domestic issues. Here is the problem in the Middle East. Most of the countries in the Middle East get poorer rather than not. And the gap between them and the developed world is increasing rather than decreasing. And here is a difference. You take a country like Yemen, which is in the news now, with all these Houthis, Shia rebels, which is basically Iranian work. The per capita income there a year is in the hundreds of dollars. Imagine, look, when the Syrian civil war started, I was in DC in a visit, and I was asked to meet with a Syrian opposition activist that was in the US. And he told me, what are you surprised about what's happening in Syria? Forget about Sunnis and Alawis. Of course, that's the root cause. But he said 60% of our people live on $2 a day. And the distribution of the meager wealth that is going, of course, more to the Alawis that were in the government as opposed to the majority of the Sunnis. Take Egypt, with a population of 110 million people and growing. And of course, when we talk about population growth, we talk to India. But I see that India is the opposite, the exception here, the example of how to do it. Egypt's population is going down all the time. And the main item on the agenda of Egypt's population is not so much economic growth, it is to ensure food security. Imagine. The war in Ukraine was for the Egyptians a potential devastating problem because they depended on the grains, on the foodstuff that they got from Ukraine. Or for that matter, from Russia. So what we talk about here is that the economy is in bad shape. And the ones who understand it, by the way, it's very interesting, are the rich countries. The UAE and now the Saudis and others, they try to diversify their economies in order not to depend only on oil and gas. I mean, the Saudis have this ambitious 2030 vision, about whatever. It will not be 2030, but it will be later. But they are working on that. The UAE as well. And they're looking for alternative sources in order to diversify their economy. And up to a point, they succeed, but up to a point. But other countries, they don't. And look at Syria now. Who says that they're going to help Syria? Turkey. Turkey itself is on the verge of bankruptcy with its bad economy. So again, the Middle East needs hundreds of billions of dollars, but, and that's a huge but, and I have to emphasize it, the dollars have not to be stolen by the rulers. Corruption has to end. The dollars have to be invested in a way that the people will benefit from it. And you know what? That's a tall order in the Middle East. That's a tall order. And the tragedy is that when people talked about Israel and the Palestinians and other Arab countries, and they talked about economic cooperation. So here is some numbers. The per capita income in Israel is approaching $55,000 a year, which is putting Israel about 20th in the world, something like that. 18 to 20th, sometimes more, sometimes less, higher, lower, okay. Take countries like, say, Jordan or the Palestinian Authority or what used to be Gaza before the war, before Hamas took over and then created all these conflicts. The per capita income was so much lower. How do you compare, how do you create economies, economic cooperation between such a highly developed economy and the opposite of it? You create all kinds of economic cooperation projects. You try to encourage, but in the end of the day, what you can offer such poorer countries is very little unless these countries want to get it from you and to cooperate with you and to accept it. But because of the conflict, because of the bias, because of the history and the legacies of the past, they don't like to do that. I said to this Syrian when I met him in Washington, I mentioned it before, you have a water problem in Syria. So for generations, for decades, okay, it could have been resolved by cooperation between Israel and Syria. So he looked at me and said, what are you talking about? The Syrians would never have cooperated with Israel. Even if they will starve their people and don't have them water, they will not cooperate with Israel. So again, when we talk about the economy here, we cannot dissociate it from the overall political situation. That's what I meant before in the beginning. You have a multiplicity of issues here that cannot be separated. And when we talk about the Middle East, we tend to look at the immediate problem and say, what's the diplomatic solution? Diplomacy is important. Diplomacy is not enough. It has to be based on more profound attitudes and solutions.
Yeah. So, sir, you were key member of Israel delegation to Madrid Peace Conference. How do you assess the Madrid Peace Conference impact on subsequent peace efforts in the Middle East, like particularly with Oslo Accords, the Abraham Accords, and the broader Arab-Israeli negotiations?
Look, we went to Madrid in 1991. I mean, it was an American initiative. And why? the Americans conducted a war against Saddam Hussein, and they wanted the Arab world not to get the impression that they are fighting against Arabs per se, but against a particular Arab regime that invaded another Arab country. So as soon as the American preparations for the war against Iraq over Kuwait started, and by the way, before we move on, just want you to know, the Israelis, and I know it firsthand experience, don't ask me how, I know. We cautioned America few weeks before Saddam Hussein invasion to Kuwait that something is going to happen. And the Americans did not share this opinion with us, but they said, you know what, if you say, okay, they commissioned their ambassador in Baghdad to meet with Saddam Hussein. There was this fateful meeting in which he said to her, you don't ask an Arab man about his word of honor. If I say there is not going to be invasion to Kuwait, there will not be. 4 days later, there was. But from the beginning of the situation, the Americans told Israel, we would like to throw Saddam out of Kuwait. Clearly, we are not going to make a regime change in Iraq. That's to the credit of George H.W. Bush. He never said it. He never said it. But after the war, we would like to go to a peace conference because we would like to capitalize. And remember, the Soviet Union was already in a state of collapse. So the Cold War was basically ending. And the one person to understand it was Hafez Assad in Syria. He was a clever fellow. He gave a big speech in March of 1991 in which he basically said, we are in a new world. The Soviet Union used to be their, main backer, ally, and protector and guarantor. It's collapsing. And we have to adapt ourselves to the new world. Adapting himself to the new world meant talk to the Americans. For him, the idea was just talk to the Americans and show to them that you are a good guy. But real peace with Israel was out of the question. In Israel, we understood it. And for us, the idea of talking to Syria was attractive. Why not? An enemy of so many decades, and Syria has always, presented itself as they say in Arabic, Kalbul Uruba, the heart of Arabism and all that. But nothing came out of it in these talks. And in the end of the day, nothing came out in many other rounds of talks later on, including with Likud governments that are so-called more hawkish, Netanyahu himself, that were ready to give Syria over 99% of the Golan Heights that was taken in 67 when they attacked Israel in the war of 67. And you ask yourself a question. He got over 99% proposal from Israel to have the Golan Heights, Hafez Assad, and then Bashar, by the way, the same. In return for peace, and they declined. Why? And that was something that was not even understood in Israel properly. And I wrote about that and talked about that. The Syrians, all the time, the Assad regime realized they have a domestic problem, their own stability. They knew that they are a minority regime. And they always were looking behind their shoulders to see what might be the reaction in Syria. When he intervened in Lebanon in 1976, Hafez Assad, that ignited the Syrian civil war at that time that lasted for 6 years until 1982, with the terrible slaughter in Hama in Syria, when 40,000 people were killed by the regime. They knew that. And they supported Iran against Iraq in the 1980-1988 war because they already developed at that time the beginning of the Syrian-Iranian axis on the basis of Shiism versus Sunnism. So here is the point. They got over 99% of Golan Heights on the table. Look, with the Palestinians, of course, it's a much more complicated issue, much different. The Palestinians got proposals of 96% of the land, and yet they refused. The latest, when Abbas was negotiating with Ehud Olmert, and the Israelis gave him the proposal, and they said to him, look, we are waiting for your response. Abbas said, will be in 48 hours. He never gave the response. He didn't reject it, just didn't give the response, which was like actual rejection. Now, your title of this discussion is opportunities.
Yeah.
There is an opportunity now, but the opportunity, and that's where the catch may be. That's where the catch 22 may be, okay? The opportunity now depends on a total defeat to Hamas and the other militant forces. Because if they still exist, they will derail any arrangement. And you know what? You may not be aware of it in India. I'm not blaming you for it. But in the last few weeks, the Palestinian Authority of Abbas slowly starting to move in this direction. Are you aware of the fact that there already are collisions, armed collisions between Palestinian Authority forces and pro-Hamas elements in Jenin, in other cities of the West Bank? And they understand that they means the Palestinian Authority understand that Hamas, if it's even small, to a small extent existing, they will try to do whatever they can to derail any arrangement. So the war in Gaza, therefore, as sad as it is, has to end up with a total defeat of Hamas, and at the same time, Hezbollah in Lebanon should not be in a position to derail or disrupt future negotiations. But then the Netanyahu government, and I say, will have to decide on their priorities as well. And Netanyahu will have to make his own big decision about his government, because the current composition of the Israeli government will not allow him to make big concessions or at all. And you do not negotiate without being ready to make concessions, you know. Negotiations is give and take, you know. You give, you take, you take, you give. You have to make concessions. Again, it brings it to the American role. America should give the overall umbrella here. The umbrella should be, we say to the militant forces in the Middle East, starting with Iran, with their proxies and others, we are not going to allow you to disrupt the process. We are not going to appease you. We are going to defeat you. And that's the choice here. It all brings it back. Look, we like and don't like America, all of us. It's like love-hate relationship. We don't like American arrogance, but we like the jeans. We don't like American patronizing, but we like the NBA basketball. We don't like this, but we like Hollywood or not, whatever. I, by the way, prefer Bollywood rather than Hollywood. You know, many people in Israel, by the way, prefer Bollywood. You'll be surprised to hear that.
Yeah.
You know, so, but then we can't without America. And if we can without America, we should do that. But that depends on us. If we can do it, America should come and help us. Now, there is a window of opportunity, but it is now. How long will it last? I don't know. Iran is weaker. Hezbollah is almost finished, but not completely. Hamas is almost finished, but not completely. It has to be complete so that the militants will not be in a position to derail. And then the Americans will come to Netanyahu and tell him, you've got what you wanted to destroy this and this enemy. Now what are you putting on the plate? Here is my peace. That's my peace approach. But, you know, I'm only an interviewee by great Indian students.
Yeah. So, like the role of the external powers in Israel-Palestine issue, the United States, Russia, European Union, they have competing interests in the region. So, what impact do you think the international mediation efforts, including the Quartet on the Middle East, can have on the peace process?
Look, the Russians never dismiss the Russians, never dismiss the Chinese, never dismiss anyone, you know, but the Russians are not in a position now to do too much about the Middle East. And what happened in Syria just now shows it to you. The moment Putin realizes that Assad is collapsing, he called his troops out, you know, and you know, look, I know it's strange to say, but in his own peculiar way, Putin is pragmatist. You know, he made a terrible mistake about Ukraine. I mean, the Russian army is in bad shape. People who knew Russia, by the way, knew it before, by the way. It's interesting how, again, Western intelligence was so wrong about Russia. Remember that the American intelligence community said that Russia will defeat Ukraine in 3 days. 3 days. It's 3 years now. All right.
Yeah.
The Russians will have to be consulted up to a small point, but not beyond that. The Chinese will have to be consulted up to a small point. Look, I don't think that Russia and China, coming back to what we already discussed, I don't think that they will go to a conflict with America that might lead to, God forbid, violence, God forbid, over the Middle East. That's not their main arena.
Yeah.
The Chinese have something else altogether, much closer to you. South China Sea, and of course, Taiwan and all that. The Russians, they have their own issues there, around the Caucasus, and then, of course, Ukraine, Eastern Europe, and all that. But not the Middle East. Yes, they have an interest, or they have interest, but they are not as crucial as the other ones. But again, we can discuss whatever we want. Somebody sitting in Mar-a-Lago in Florida at Trump, and God knows what goes through his mind. His statements are not so clear-cut. I mean, yes, if I come, I'll do this, I'll do that. And then there are leaks that sources close to Trump say that what he meant was this as opposed to that. Let's see what happens.
So, sir, about the nuclear ambitions of Iran and the complicities surrounding the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, what do you believe are the key challenges facing international diplomacy in addressing nuclear proliferation in the Middle East? And do you think the region's nuclear non-proliferation efforts will eventually succeed, or will they continue to fuel the geopolitical tensions?
They should succeed,
Yeah.
but how?
Hmm.
Look, I'm not I'm not a warmonger. I consider myself to be a nice guy. I don't want to see wars all the time. The Iranian nuclear program has to be destroyed. How to do it? Diplomatically, fine, but it failed. The Iranians basically are keeping the lead over that. They do what they want. At their time, sometimes they slow down, sometimes to speed up, but they keep, their hands on the keys. They say that in the end of the day, they want to destroy Israel. And you might say, maybe some Arabs are happy, they want to destroy Israel. No, the Arabs are not happy about that. You know why? Because they say if they can destroy Israel, they will destroy us, because she is Sunnis and all that. The Saudis are the first to. And by the way, Turkey doesn't like it either, and so on and so forth. Destroying the Iranian nuclear program can stop the unchecked proliferation in the Middle East. Not doing it may buy us some time of peace and quiet, which people in the West like to be happy about. Oh, peace, quiet, everything is quiet, let's talk about something else. The Iranians do not want to stop their nuclear program because they see it, A, as a measure of self-defense for their own regime, for their own state, but also as a deterrence towards other countries in the Middle East and a threat over them. And the means of spreading their influence. Their influence is very bad. So the formula here is weaken them whenever it matters and wherever it matters. And what it most matters to them is the nuclear program. The conclusion, therefore, is very clear. It should stop and stop quickly. For 15 years, Netanyahu, almost all these years he was prime minister, has been prime minister, talked about Iran, made all these shows in the UN, in his speeches and all that, and didn't do anything almost about it. Now there is growing pressure on Israel on him. I don't know if you're aware of it. A lot of pressure on him in Israel, including, by the way, from people in the left who say to him, we have to live with the Palestinians, and in the end of the day, we have to make peace with them, but we don't need to live with an Iranian nuclear bomb. And that's very interesting. And Trump makes again his noises, and voices that can be understood in both ways. So we'll see what happens. The Iranian nuclear program is the one tool that gives credence to their assumed role in the Middle East. if their assumed role, as I tried to say before and explain, is negative, is destructive, go to the center of it, which means the Iranian nuclear program has to be destroyed, period, destroyed. Can I be clearer than that?
Yeah. So, sir, about the renewable energy, how is the transition to the renewable energy affecting the Middle East oil-dependent economies? How are they navigating this through this change? And can this transition offer Middle East opportunities to redefine its role in the global energy landscape?
It should be the case that renewable and alternative sources of energy, but it's a problem in the Middle East because if you look alternative to oil, so I mean, you weaken those rich countries, but you don't enrich the poorer countries. The Saudis and the UAE, by the way, are looking for ways to do it,
Yeah.
by the way, which is again
Mm-hmm.
interesting. The richer ones will become even richer by developing this. The Israelis are very good at that. Solar energy and all that is very basically an Israeli technology that was adopted. The desalination projects in Israel make sure that now Israel doesn't depend anymore on rain for its water supply, even though, I mean, the land needs to have rain, but they basically 70% of the water consumption in Israel is through the desalination project. The Arab countries, but that's exactly the problem. I mean, you have to invest in this rather than in your military, rather than in your keeping the regime going, and investing so much money in that. And that's a challenge. Look, we've got to do much more about it. But who would do it? Who would put the money behind it? The money behind it can come from the oil-rich countries and from the rest of the world. Now, who in the rest of the world has the money to do it? You said before, China. Maybe, look, I will throw it to you. India is such a success story. I mean, it's an unbelievable success story. I mean, it's becoming really a power in so many ways, in so many respects. Well, I don't know if you're aware of it. During the virus epidemic in America, almost every doctor who talked on American television on the virus and how to deal with it was Indian American. It's unbelievable. Maybe countries like India, Japan, and others that are interested in developing all these sources and all this will invest also more, but do it in a way that will not be a waste of the money and that will go to pockets of the rulers or whatever. We do as much in Israel, by the way. I mean, there's no question about that. The Israelis, basically Israel has become now an exporter of natural gas. So we are really lessening the use of coal and all that, almost non-existent. It still is, but almost non-existent. But Israel is just a smaller country altogether, only 10 million people, I mean, it's like one big city in India, right? Yeah. So, but you pinpointed to something very significant. But look, I'm not optimistic about that. I'll be honest with you. I'm not optimistic. And I'll tell you why. I'm not optimistic because exactly what I already have said from the very beginning. We have a tendency in the world of immediately solving the immediate problem and then moving on. And not getting to the bottom of issues. And that is a problem. I'll give you one more example about that. Take Libya. A civil war in 2011. And it seemed like Gaddafi is the problem, so they got rid of him. Joseph Biden, before he became vice president and before he became president, he said one time something very interesting. He said, look at us Democrats in America. Oh, the civil war in Libya, we decided to intervene. But unlike the Republicans in Iraq, we just sent our Air Force. It cost us $1 billion, $1 billion. Gaddafi is out. Not even one American was killed. And Libya is okay. Libya is not okay. Libya is a non-state state. Libya is totally destroyed. Who talks about Libya now? What did we hear about Libya? There are two governments. Libya is torn apart. Tribalism, they kill each other. Slave trade even. Unbelievable. And that's typical Western approach. Gaddafi might been seen as a problem. We got rid of him now. Okay. So why do I give Libya as an example? Exactly because it is an example. I'm afraid the same will happen in Syria now. What will happen in Syria can be the fundamentalists that are in control now will decide to pursue their agenda, their religious agenda, and they will cause troubles to their neighbors, mainly Israel, immediately after some time, or the world, led by the US and other countries, will say, here are $100 billion that we can give you. Under our supervision, start rebuilding. What do you think will happen? I am afraid the first will happen, not the second. That will be another example of why I'm not so optimistic. But you know what? At my old age, after all that I've seen and been around and all that, I would like to say, you know what? I will be happy to be wrong. And if I'm wrong, I'll be the first to say I'm wrong. Look, at my age, I can say I was wrong. I'm afraid I'll be right.
So, with the transition is underway, the energy transition. So, till then, the strategic importance of Strait of Hormuz in the global economy is vital. Oil transit choke point remains. So, how the tension in the region can be mitigated when there is a potential risk of Iran blocking it?
As I said before, I mean, the answer is in the question, Iran. It has to be made very clear to Iran now, as we talk, tomorrow morning, the 21st of January, in Trump's speech on the 20th of January, whatever, we are not going to allow you anymore to disrupt. We are going to stop you at all costs, and we are going to do it and to start doing it. But that's what I said. Look, again, I don't know what will happen. And look, in a situation like that, when you have an aggressive power, you have to bring the ball to their doorstep, to their court. They have to make the big decisions. When you look historically at conflicts, forget about the Middle East, take Europe, take the Second World War, take the way they tried to appease Hitler. The genius of this mass murderer, terrible person, Hitler, that's the worst person that you can think of, from a Jewish perspective, obviously, was that he knew all the time how to throw the ball to the doorstep of the Western democracies and make them decide on should we or should we not sacrifice Czechoslovakia? Should we or should we not accept the annexation of Austria and later on Poland and all this? Instead of making it clear to him, you enter Austria, it's a war, and in a war you're going to lose. No, the same goes with Iran. They have to be in a position now to make their crucial, fateful decision. We continue the old game, or it is a new situation. As they say in American English, a new ball game. That's how I see it. And by the way, also brings it to what I just told you about pressures in Israel on Netanyahu. Just before I started this discussion with you, I read another article by two Israeli strategist professors that I know personally are not right-wingers or terribly hawkish, saying, attack Iran now. Now is the time to do it. They are at their weakest point. And when your enemy is at its weakest point, don't feel sorry for them, go after them, or make sure that they realize that they're at their weakest point and leave you alone. The Iranians don't show any sign of leaving us alone, so we don't have to leave them alone.
And sir, with the severe environmental challenges in the Middle East, the water scarcity and desertification, how do you view the regional cooperation initiative like the Red Sea and Dead Sea project? This initiative, which aimed at address both environmental sustainability and regional diplomatic ties. In the light of this, how do you assess the potential for similar project in the future to contribute to both environmental resilience and fostering diplomatic relation in the region?
Everything should be done about desertification and the water situation. I mentioned that before. Desalination is one of the big solutions. We can give it to any Arab country. We have it in Israel. We developed the technology, you know. Ironically, the Israelis developed the technology over 40 years back and did not use it until about 20 years only. But now about 70% of the Israeli water consumption comes from desalination projects. And look, we already are in touch with some other countries about that. Jordan, for example, gets water from Israel, and they always ask for more and more water because basically Jordan is dry. Syria will have to do it now. And, you know, Turkey can help them about water because the Turks have control over the Euphrates flow that also goes via Iraq to Syria and all that, you know. And they could help the Syrians switch waters from the north of Syria to the south of Syria instead of rebuilding the Syrian army for whatever purpose. Again, the Turks already said, we are going to invest in building a new army of 300,000 Syrians. So why do they need it now? They need reconstruction. They need, you know, water. They need clean water and all that. Look, that has to be done. And I'm not familiar with every technology. That's not my field, you know. But yeah, it has to be done. And by the way, I know that you are aware of the fact that when Prime Minister Modi visited Israel, Netanyahu and him signed an agreement by which Israel supplied India. I don't know exactly how it still works. I hope it works, you know, these smaller installations of desalination that can work on local level rather than the big ones, you know. And I think it is being used, it still is being used in India. That's very important. It has to be done. Look, water. Now, water is very significant. You look today at southwest Iran. It's becoming inhabitable. That's the problem, not Israel. You look at South Iraq, all the way from the Shat al-Arab, as they call it, Basra and beyond. Look, the pictures coming from there, it's terrible. I mean, you know, desertification, but the climate change, look, is affecting the Middle East terribly, and it's already affecting the Middle East. It's not something that will affect, it is already affecting. There are areas in Iraq and Iran where in the summer, the temperature can be 140 Fahrenheit. I mean, it is unbelievable, and there is no rain. The Jordan Valley between Israel and Jordan, few years ago, registered 147 degrees one day. But because of the cooperation between Israel and Jordan, the Jordanians get water and they have developed agriculture on the other side of the Jordan. What used to be Jordan River, it's no more like than a creek now. There's hardly any water there. It's also a problem, you know. But that's not enough. Much more has to be done. Much, much, much more. That's a crucial existential issue.
So we have also talked about the Syria problem, the fall of Assad in Syria. So, like going back to the topic, like what's next for Syria? Can we hope for peace after decade-long civil war?
Look, in 2019, everybody said Assad won the civil war. I wrote, no, he did not. He did not win the civil war. And why everybody said it? Again, connect the dots of this discussion. Look, I'm sorry if I sound a bit methodical in this discussion. I'm a professor by training, you know, so I, you know, market my ideas in a methodically, you know, and I try to connect the dots. Because everybody looked at Assad, he was wearing the tie, meeting people in his palace, even starting to go abroad, one or two visits, and it seemed like, okay, Syria is normal. When there were so many signs, it wasn't. And I wrote about the 2019, he's losing, he's not winning. So we lost years in terms of misunderstanding Syria. And the result of it is that now everybody is surprised by what happened. And because you are surprised, you don't have any ready plans. The only ones who have plans are the Turks because they planned it, they orchestrated it, and they were behind all that. Here is, again, a question that you have to ask Erdogan in Turkey. Of course, you ask me, I understand, but not me. He has to decide what he wants to do with Syria. If he is going to invest in Syria in order to turn Syria into a Turkish colony that will be part of the neo-Ottomanism vision that he has, or if he wants to stabilize Syria because he understands that if Syria is not stable, he is now in control maybe, but tomorrow it will be the opposite, you know, the grass of your neighbor. If it's not green enough, yours will not be also green. So Syria is in a crossroads. They need hundreds of billions of dollars for rehabilitation and reconstruction. Hundreds. You know, the population of Syria decreased from 23 million to 16, 17, 6 to 8 million Syrians are refugees outside of Syria. If you want them back, where will they go to? So, an example, inside Syria itself, displacement. There was ethnic cleansings. Basically, the Alawis are all chased out and go back to their mountains, which don't provide them any means of livelihood. It will be, So it depends to a large extent on Turkey. Turkey is the dominant force now. Now, I emphasize now. And they are members of NATO. Bring it back to where? The US. We need to understand what are their intentions. I think the ordinary Syrians, what they want is bread and butter now, because they really suffered. They suffered totally. And by the way, the Israelis now are trying to prevent the south of Syria from becoming a hostile zone. So they have Israeli troops temporarily, I hope so, at least in South Syria. And they're helping the population by providing foods, medical stuff, and all that. And there are people that can go to Israeli hospitals, cross the border freely, and go, and so on and so forth. That's what Syria needs. Now, will it happen? I doubt it again. I look at the leader now, Ahmad al-Shara, or his nom de guerre, Ahmad al-Julani, Ahmad from the Julan, from the Golan. That's, and he says to a large extent the right things. But you know what happens behind the words? You should see the videos coming from Syria. Terrible atrocities in the streets against Alawis. Terrible atrocities, terrible things are happening. You don't see anything in the media, nothing. It's all about peaceful transition. It is not. The beginning of the transition, therefore, to me, sends mixed signals. I'm not so optimistic. I hear all the statements, but I see the videos, and the videos are terrible. They are heartbreaking. It's not a question of feeling sorry or not for other people. The Alawis were the oppressors, now they are oppressed. When you see these videos, when people stop youngsters in the street and ask them, are you Alawi or Sunni? They say Alawi, they shoot them and kill them. That's terrible. That's not a good omen. Syria is a divided society, geographically, ethnically, religiously, and historically. And therefore, the solutions should reflect the entire majority of the entire population, not just the Sunni now that feel like after all these years of Alawi regime, now we are the bosses, we'll do whatever we want. Because if that's the attitude, the Syrian civil war will repeat itself. We have three problems now that we have to look at. First is the Kurdish-Turkey situation in northeastern Syria that could explode into a full-scale war. Secondly, the south, Israel, the Druze, Syria and Lebanon and Jordan, and then the long border between Syria and Lebanon. If the Syrians will allow hostile elements to still continue to smuggle arms to Hezbollah in Lebanon, then the Israelis will have to intervene. So this guy Ashara has to make decisions about all that, and of course his decisions are being influenced by the Turks. The Turks will have to make their decisions. If they start a war with the Kurds in the northeast of Syria, it's a bad sign. So if you look for signs about what's happening in Syria, look at all these three regions and the reports coming from them. That will give you a signal as to what is happening.
So that's all from my side. Like it's already 1 hour. I will let Toshiba ma'am to take over the mic.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. That was an insightful discussion, and I'm sure we all here at JNU Insights have benefited from it. But I guess she has taken so many questions, but two questions I would say from my side as well. One is a bit personal, another one I really want to know from you. Because since you have been serving, of course, as a professor since many years, and you have also served as a to the defense ministry, or as a kind of consultant there in the ministry as well. So I have, like we mentioned, Modi ji, Narendra Modi ji visiting Israel, and he was the first prime minister to do so in history in 2017. And from there, we all have been really looking forward, like, the amount of GDP that Israel spent on the research and development. It's actually a lot compared to the countries like India, and even compared to US, right? So it's around 6%, and India is around not even 1% we spend on our research and development. And also the number of scientists that Israel produces, like out of 10,000 people, 180 people are, going into the scientific domain. So since we all are doing PhD, and many students are into the research field. So what's that one suggestion? Because we have also read that there is one kind of center that Israel has developed named as iCore. So I guess there is a lot to learn from the Israeli technology, as one you mentioned, desalinization plant being one among them. So how can India and Israel go together and benefit from this thing?
Very simple. Just work together in every field. And by the way, it happens. Not enough, but it happens. And I met personally, I met Indian delegations in Israel already in 1989, 1990, even before the complete collapse of Soviet Union that enabled the relationships to develop and all that. I mean, things change, and also because of the domestic changes in India. But already then there was the beginning of cooperation. There is a lot of cooperation, obviously, on military issues, as you know, but that should not be the only one, and that should not be the main one. I think that what I said before to your colleague, to Rana, about Silicon Valley, it's like a joke, who is in Silicon Valley? There are Indians, Israelis, and even some Americans. That's a good example because they work together there. And
Yeah.
there should be much more cooperation about issues connected with water, clean water,
Yeah.
desalination, anything connected with other sources of energy, solar and others, and any other field of high-tech. The Israeli high-tech industry is the engine of the Israeli economy, what they call the startup nation. What they call the Israeli economic miracle. By the way, even today, 2024, despite all the wars and all that, the Israeli economic growth is over 3%. It's unbelievable, because they produce what people need to buy, so no boycott will change it and all this, And I think that Prime Minister Modi understands it, and it has to go beyond government to academic cooperations. I know about Israeli scholars who are already in cooperation with Indian counterparts, and it is a very fruitful one. As a matter of fact, when I was approached by you guys, I was in touch with some of these people in Israel to ask them more about this university and all that. I wanted to know, and they told me, look, it's a prestigious, great university, and we are cooperating with this university, and why not, So it has to go from governmental level to the civic, to the societal civilian sector, and it happens, and it has to go beyond the traditional cooperation. It was about diamonds. I don't know if you're aware, but there was a lot of cooperation over the diamonds industry and all that, So I think that it is developing, but not enough. I want to see more of India as being a very significant part or a component of the overall Israeli foreign trade on both sides of it, Not enough. You'll be surprised to hear that despite the bad relations between Israel and Turkey, there still is a lot of trade between the two countries. So let alone when there is no enmity between Israel and India, it could be, There is a delicate issue here that it's the elephant in the room. It's your neighboring countries. Pakistan and Bangladesh, who of course are, boycott Israel. Israelis can't even enter those countries with Israeli passport. Crazy. And everybody will always think that all cooperation between Israel and India is aimed against other countries. We need to make sure that they don't think so. And that is part of the marketing here, right? As well as the actual cooperation. So I agree with you completely. It should continue, and it will continue. Look, it will continue because India is, I have to tell you something. I gave one of my courses was about global cyber cultures. And I explained to people that a lot of what we know now about mathematics and other fields started in India. And American students like, I mean, for them, America is, everything is America. You know, I mean, I told them, look, you're talking about the culture of 5,000 years, you're talking about the Middle East, thousands, you know. So there is a lot in common between the overall historic heritage and the cultural heritage that should lead to more cooperation. What can I tell you? I'm not saying it only because I talk to an Indian audience now, because that's what it is. India is
That's true.
the
That's
force of
true.
the future, or one of the forces of the future. I mean,
That's
those who don't understand it, don't understand the world.
exactly. That's true. That's true.
Yeah. And you know, I
That's
was
true,
in
sir.
India
That's true.
I was in 1998 in India. And I extended
Okay.
my stay there because Air India were on strike when I had to go back. So until they arranged for an El Al flight to come and all that, you know. So I stayed 3 more days in India than what was planned. And I really asked, they talked, and it was interested. And I noticed, you know, the unlimited potential, the unlimited of India, the unlimited.
True.
And I said to myself already at that time, Israel has a lot of potential. I don't know if it's unlimited because we are after all smaller, much smaller, you know, but a lot of potential, the cooperation here. So that happens. And, you know, the Chinese understood it before the Indians. I have to say, they do. And they invest in technological, they buy technology. So bear it in mind, India should not waste time here. Time is running out. We have to do it, and to do it now.
Running.
To do it now. The Chinese
True,
are
sir.
very,
True.
very good about it. They understand it. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. That was actually very insightful. And with all the kind words you have to say about India, in fact, we also look forward to have you soon here. And we'll ask Air India to go on strike again, maybe, so that you can extend your stay here again for a few more
That
days.
was really,
So when was the last time you were in India?
it was 1998. That was the only one. So I went from New Delhi to Mumbai because the El Al flight would come to Mumbai. So it took 3 days. And I mean, you know, we stayed in Mumbai, you know, for
Okay.
3 more days. But I liked it, you know. It gave me an opportunity to enhance my, you know, it was over 20 years back, you know. And but look, I was very happy to get this invitation from you because all my neighbors here are Indians. We are like family. I mean, you know. And I immediately told a couple of them, you know, I was invited by JNU. Said, what, really? So
That's
that's
sweet.
the best university. I don't know. I hope you are. I mean, I don't know. You know, the best university in India. Why did they invite you? I said, because I'm your neighbor. That's why. All,
You
I'll
must be
tell
a very
you,
good neighbor, I'm sure.
let me tell you something. All the
Yeah.
electronic management of big corporations in this area are done by Indian Americans. It's
Indians.
unbelievable.
That's true.
That's as simple as that. And there are some idiots who talk about immigration and all this. I mean, America was built by people like, you know, the Indians, the Jews, and yeah. Well, okay, look,
That's
that's what
true.
it
That's
is.
true. No, that's actually, sir. We have, like, India has been very good in service sector, but one thing that we missed was the manufacturing. So probably we are going back to the roots again. So as you know, we have engineers all across the world. Myself, I also did my engineering, so I know the importance of the Indian, the brain drain, as we say here. But it's actually blessing in disguise. At least we are doing something somewhere. So that's very nice. And we also,
By the way, not to stop you, you know how they say that there are 80,000 Indian doctors in America.
oh
80,000. And by the way, some of them are the best. The guy that was appointed by Biden to be the virus
yeah,
czar, Indian
yeah.
America, you know, for example.
Exactly, exactly. True, true, true. That's nice, sir. So
Yeah.
we will make sure that students here as well at JNU Insights, and they will also make us more proud. And you will also see some of these bright minds there very soon. And with that, thank you so much for giving your time. And I
Thank
also
you.
saw you have been given the best faculty award way back in 2019 or something. So we really wish to we are very fortunate to have you amongst us, and though for a very short while, but sometime in future, please do enlighten us, keep enlightening us.
We can do online courses, you know. If it's India, we'll do
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
that.
We
Thank
are
you very
always
much.
hungry for knowledge. Yeah.
Thank you very, very much. Appreciate your hospitality and have a great, great week ahead of you. Take care.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for
You
your time.
too.
And thank you so
You
much,
too.
Kusam, for conducting such a good interview. And it was very, very engaging and enlightening for all of us.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much, sir.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
You too. Take
Yeah.
care. Bye
Take
bye.
care, sir.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye. Bye.